Welcome to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to and remembering. I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVMLP Asheville 103.7 and streaming online, WPVMFM.org, the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song, walterparks.com for more on Walter's music. Thank you, Devine Dial, for managing WPVM-FM, and thank you, Robin Collier, for managing KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio in Taos, New Mexico. If you'd like to reach me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled Nave. And I'd like to remind you that we're sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you'd like to improve your writing chops, imaginativestorm.com is a great place to start. Today, my guest, Dr. Aditi Sethi, lives in Asheville. She is the director of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying in Swannanoa, North Carolina. I met Aditi when she was getting ready to do a TEDx Asheville talk, which happened this past March 2024. And I was involved a little bit in helping her prepare her talk. And I did get a chance to go to the TEDx Asheville event, and I watched her on stage, and she was great. So Aditi, you were great on stage, and I wanted you to be here with us today. So thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Navé.
And I'd like to start with what you do as the director for the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And I was looking at conscious living and dying, and I wanted you to reflect on this idea of living. And then when we say dying, we are not talking about death, because death is afterlife. So living and dying, we start dying the moment we start living. Can you give us some thoughts on this idea? Because you do work with people in this process. So fill us out a bit, and we'll go from there and see where this takes us.
Beautiful. So you say we are dying as soon as we start living, with such clarity and acknowledgement. And it seems very natural to you to say that, or for you to say that. There's no question. It's a what is. As you stated that we are dying as soon as we begin living, there was a clarity and a certainty and an acceptance of the what is of that statement. And in my work supporting those in their dying process since I was 17, so I'm 43 now, 20 plus years ago, I was struck at how few people actually understand or understood what you just said. And this reality that death is an inherent part of life, and that we are constantly looking at life and death in the same breath. And it's not something that many people think about. It's something that people actually not even just don't think about it, they avoid it. This approach to death that is really, once you're in a crisis, that's when you start to look at it. And that does not, my experience has not served the person who's dying or their loved ones and their community. Seeing that repeatedly at the bedside over and over again, this lack of preparation, this fear of death, this lack of acknowledgement, even as someone's dying, families are in denial that it's happening, or just it's too overwhelming to even contemplate or consider that this is the reality they're facing. That catalyzed my desire to help shift this approach to death that I've been seeing in our modern world, because it is a modern phenomenon.
So death is a final thing in the sense of the person no longer being with us as we once knew them. And yet we have constructed many ways of describing it because it seems so final to us. She is no longer here. There's nothing there I know anymore. The body's there, the person that I knew, the animation, the soul, whatever it is that kept them alive is not there. We have constructed the idea of dying as a final act. In your work, do you see dying in a more expanded way, or how do you see it, or how has your understanding of it evolved as you've worked over these years as a doctor in the living and the dying situations for all these years?
The first half of my career, if you will, in this work has been in the medical model of dying. And that model isn't actually that interested in consciousness and the continuation in consciousness after death, because in the biomedical model, when you cease to breathe or circulate blood, You don't exist anymore. If I were just wearing that hat, the doctor hat, then I would say, yeah, I think it is the end, right? But in my heart and in my deepest knowing, I have experienced something that continues after that last breath. In the space after death, that's liminal space where the portal, if you will, or the veil is so thin. It's always thin, but we're more aware of it in those moments. I feel something, a continuation of consciousness after death. And the research is pretty astounding. A woman who's part of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying, Kat Houghton, offers a whole course. She's a PhD psychologist who dove deep into this research, and she offers a 4-hour course on this topic, mediumship, survival of consciousness after death, et cetera. And it's just so profound. And in my personal experiences with the deaths in my life, that's where my understanding is shifting and has shifted. Because one of my dearest friends who I spoke of in the TEDx talk, Paula, who is also my mother-in-law, she died in 2019. If I told you that I thought she was gone, that would be an untruth, because I feel her presence, I sense her, and that is my lived experience of her after she has died. Our ancestors have had relationships with their ancestors in the past. We have somehow lost that connection, but I feel like they're guiding me to this day, and that could be considered woo or out there, but that is my experience, and so that's what I know.
I've lately been thinking about the soul, and we tend to claim our soul. My soul is going to somewhere in the afterlife that's good. My soul will do this. I am taking care of my soul. My soul's destiny, often my soul's destiny, like, well, your soul's contained in you. And the only ghost I've ever seen is the ghost I look at every day because I'm animated. It's just contained inside of me. I wonder if the soul belongs to all of us. And instead of it being my soul, what I'm experiencing is the soul of eternity flowing through me. And I'm just claiming the experience and calling it my soul, when in fact, it's an ebb and flow of something much greater than me. And when I die, my soul doesn't leave my body. My body just stops conducting the soul that's been existing since infinity started, which it never did, because how could it start? Or even for that matter, how could it end? Any reflections on that idea?
Yeah, I think the great wisdom traditions have spoken to what you've just shared. If we go back far enough before humans interpreted it in ways that supported their agenda or mission. We talk of death as a universal experience, and I spoke of that essence that I experience. It does feel very similar, no matter what the flavor or the expression of that essence is. You know, our unique, you're a poet and a performer, and I bring my music, and, you know, we all have our different expressions, but at the essence and the core, maybe we are all one. And that whole idea of unity consciousness, or that experience of unity consciousness, is, for me, has been a felt experience. So I tap into that collective energy. I believe we all return to that ocean, and maybe we are all drops in the ocean. So we're all one. It's fascinating.
I would like to think that. And what I like about belief, I really am not required to prove my beliefs because I can't do it anyway. So often people are going around trying to give me some kind of scientific proof about something that exists within the context of their beliefs. And it's just not possible. I'm happy if you tell me you believe something. I'm happy to accept whatever it is you believe, because it's beyond, outside of the realm of my grounded human experience. And I hope that people will accept what I believe based on that same idea, not trying to prove me right or wrong. And I think when we do that, it really opens up quite a bit of range in terms of how we can have some generosity around the different ways people view the world. And everybody views it differently. What person views through my lens? Only me.
Yeah. You know, it's interesting. And I've often said that I don't have many beliefs. So it's interesting that I said I believe. One example of that, I was growing up in the South. I was born in India, moved to Georgia when I was 3. My dad was Hindu, my mom was Sikh. So I would go to different temples. In Sunday school, they talked about reincarnation. And that's sort of an understanding in Eastern philosophy, that reincarnation. Actually, I think in other traditions as well, even Christianity in the early teachings. I remember understanding that reincarnation as a belief. And then I had an experience with my unborn son. And it was with a medium who I had never been to a medium, actually. And I saw a flyer that at the Salt Cave in Asheville, and I felt called to have a session, so I went. Long story short, I had an experience of feeling this beloved soul, this beloved being, who I'd felt my whole life and didn't understand what it was about. And it just made sense that everything came together. Like some of my anxieties around having a child, my fears of not having a son. I didn't know where that came from. So as long as I can remember. And I had this experience of him entering the space, and I wept and grieved probably lifetimes of stuff. I don't know where it came from. It was like a faucet was turned on. And it shifted my whole experience of bringing him into the world. And I didn't even find out his gender because I didn't want to minimize this powerful experience of that energy. So then I started saying, I know reincarnation is real. Like I know it. I felt it in my body. It was not a mental thing. It wasn't a construct of my construct, a mental construct. It was a deep feeling, a deep knowing. And so that's what I'll say about belief. It's like I tend to want to have a direct experience of something before I speak to it.
Well, one of the things about reincarnation, I just thought of this. Reincarnation implies to reincarnate, to be back into the body. So if you drop the re and you just say, I'm incarnated, there's a lot of evidence that we all have been incarnated at least once.
Right.
I mean, how many or 8 billion people is hard to refute, all these incarnates walking around, right? So the re part to me seems like a grand possibility. And my only revision around reincarnation, coming back as a physical body human being, I started to think, what would stop me from showing up 300 light years away on another planet, being reincarnated on another planet completely, or for that matter, being reincarnated in another dimension. I might not get back around to Earth for 1 million more years. Maybe it's gone by then because the sun fried it. But and when I think about that possibility in context with all of the possibilities that are infinite in the universe, that none of which we really understand because they're so vast, I'm thinking, well, that makes perfect sense to me. Maybe I might do another turn right here at this table 10 years from now in another form. But why limit it to Earth?
I love it. Yeah. Why? Why limit anything?
Yeah. I mean, so it really does open the field up. Now, that might not be quite orthodox in terms of how people see it from the more religious point of view, but I love the idea of having that possibility. That's a belief. Can we prove it? No. Can I prove the stars exist in the sky? Well, I can tell you I see them, and that's proof enough for me. And beyond that, we don't know.
I love the mystery. I speak to that often, just sitting in the mystery. And have you heard of Brian Weiss, that book, Many Lives, Many Masters? He's written other books, but he is a psychiatrist by training at some top-notch medical institutions. And as a psychiatrist, his tools were limited to pharmaceutical and some therapeutic interventions. But as he started doing hypnosis on people, he was noticing they were going to these past lives. And when they came out of it and did some processing of that experience under hypnosis, their existing traumas healed, anxieties, phobias. He really talks about past life regressions and that work. I haven't read his work in a long time, but that's what comes to mind when we talk about this. So there is some scientific evidence, if you will.
Yeah. And for me, I don't need scientific evidence. All I need to know is that infinity exists and it can take care of itself. Above my pay grade, I have to just stay right here on Earth and work with whatever's right in front of me and leave it at that. There's a great freedom for me in thinking like that, because I absolutely don't have to prove it, which means I don't have to argue it, and I don't have to try to push back on somebody else's view, because people tend to do that. We're going to talk about this. I don't believe this because I believe this. And the other person says, yeah, but I believe this, so I don't believe that. It's a nice way to maybe buy a person another coffee in a coffee shop and have some philosophical conversation. It's an entertaining loop that will get you somewhere, but it never will resolve the questions that are being asked, which is okay too, I think.
Right. Yeah, I think I tend to enjoy not getting into that loop. I tend to avoid the loop.
Let me move to the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. I have to say, I haven't been to visit. I will tell you, every time someone says Center for Conscious Living and Dying, there's a ring in their voice. It's a very well respected center around Western North Carolina. For those of you listening outside of Western North Carolina, Swannanoa is between Asheville and Black Mountain on Highway 70. And it's a beautiful area, lots of mountains, lots of green, everything you would expect in Western North Carolina. So tell us about this place. Why do people respond so well to it? What's going on out there that we need to know about? How does it work?
I think the pause is here because it's sort of still a mystery to me as to the why it has been so received and people are so hungry for connection in that space of the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. I believe that the work we're doing with CCLD is an acronym, is a collective, co-created vision. And I think that piece is unfamiliar and curious for people, and that draws them, because what does it look like to have an organization, a community come together? I call it the grand experiment, but without rigid ideas of what it needs to be, without dogma, without a lot of constraints, really. And I think that's what we're experiencing in this community. So it emerged after I took care of a gentleman, Ethan Sisser, who's a 36-year-old with a glioblastoma brain tumor. And there's a documentary out about that journey, actually, about me entering his life 2 weeks before he died and rallying a community to support him in his dying days. It's called The Last Ecstatic Days, and you can look it up online. That journey for me was a mystical experience. My whole perspective shifted on who I was, what I was here to bring, how we can coexist. Like I was just having so many insights and downloads in that 2 weeks. When he was taking his last breath, it was really clear to me I was guided energetically, a deep knowing, again, that energy of knowing, intuition, if you will, to leave my career as I knew it, which was as a full-time hospice doctor in Asheville, which a job that I loved and will always cherish. And my intuition guided me to put my notice in and jump into this river and the unknown, and just follow the breadcrumbs and follow the current. And where that took me, and now us collectively, is to Swannanoa, and this beautiful 6-acre estate has been gifted for use for now. We will try to buy it, half of it back. And there's an event space, and it is a portal. When you drive in, you go through this long, windy road, beautiful maples lining the driveway, and you come to this vista overlooking these beautiful ancient mountains. So it's an energetic, felt presence when you arrive on that land alone. It was there before the center was there. And then the organization now has about maybe 300 volunteers. So the interest continues to grow, and it's rippling out into other aspects of other parts of the country and the world. The focus is caring for those who are in their dying season and supporting them holistically, practically, physically, emotionally, spiritually, to prepare to leave their body, and then to support their bodies after they die, to honor their bodies with after-death care if they want that, and to support their families and their communities. So I can say more about the logistics if you want me to go there now, but that's the gist.
Say a little more about the logistics. I would love to get a sense of that.
So hospice and palliative care emerged within the medical system to offer care for those dying in their homes and to support the whole person and their family. So you may think, what are you doing differently? Hospice is a medical model for caring for people who are dying, and it's an incredible model because it provides a lot of medical care. A doctor comes to visit, You have a physician on your team, a nurse, two CNA or a CNA for visits, chaplain and social work support, and sometimes volunteer support. And the goal is to support people to die where they want in their home. They need to be in a facility. There are some communities like ours that have an inpatient hospice house, but you have to have medical reasons for being there, symptoms that aren't managed at home. So not having enough caregiving support doesn't qualify you to be in an inpatient hospice. So there are gaps in that model that the medical system isn't really tasked to fill or interested in filling. And that's the caregiver, what we call caregiver insufficiency. We have a caregiver crisis, and it's going to only grow with our aging population. So I have seen people who don't have family nearby, don't have children, don't have any support that end up having to die in nursing homes or in the hospital because they can't be at home. The center emerged to fill some of those gaps. And the model that we're using is the Omega Home network model. And homes during the AIDS crisis popped up where, people with AIDS couldn't die in the hospital and their families weren't willing to take care of them. So they had no place to go. And individuals opened their homes and rallied communities of volunteers to tend to those who were dying. And they mainly were clustered in New England. And these homes have come together to form a network. And there are about 40 in the country, 40 in development. And we are an Omega Home. We're the only one in North Carolina right now. And we provide 24/7 care, volunteer-led support, free of charge to 3 people who are dying at a time in a home environment. And so that's the model that we're basing our direct care off of. Now, when you think of offering 24/7 care with volunteers, I think a lot of people don't realize how much it takes to actually show up at the bedside and be fully present. It sounds simple, but to be fully present with someone, there is so much contemplation, self-reflection, understanding of who you are and your traumas and what you bring that has to happen in order to be that hollow bone, that service-centered spirit at the bedside. So that is where a lot of the conscious living and the community building and the training and the preparation come in. Education is also a big part of our offering. So direct care, community building, and education are our main pillars. And education includes going into communities, educating about death and dying and grief, and also we'll offer a death doula training, end-of-life doula training program. And that's started this year, and we have about 25 people in that cohort, and they're from all over the country. So.
And you also have the presentation room and other things people can participate in. Do folks just come out for visits to hang out at the center and enjoy the living part of it?
Yeah, so if you go to our website, ccld.community, you'll see a listing of events, and they're open public events, so you're always welcome to join us for those. Members of the center are invited to offer their gifts. So we have quite a bit of programming, and that may shift in the coming months if it gets overwhelming. But so there's open public events and there's member-only events. So if you're interested in learning more, please come visit. We also have a tours team, so you can come out for a tour, set that up by emailing tours at ccld.community.
Well, thank you for doing all of that. That's really amazing. And when I'm back in North Carolina in a few weeks, I'm going to reach out to you and come for a tour. I'd love to see the place. I've heard so much about it over the years. I heard a lot about your work from you when you stood on the TEDx Asheville stage. And I know when I was working with you, you were trying to develop your talk. And when I watched you do it, kudos, you did a great job. I know you were nervous. You didn't seem nervous. You seemed perfectly composed up there on that stage in front of 500 people in the Diane Wortham Theater. Well done. Can you tell us a bit about what it was like to prepare your TED Talk? And I was also on the organizing committee that helped choose people. So we had 130 applicants. We had to choose 9 of the 130. You ended up being one of the 9. There you were on the stage. Give us a sense of that, because other people out there would love to do TED Talks, and they might like to know what it was like for you.
Thank you for that question. I smile, like my whole being is beaming right now, because it's amazing, the journey that I have been on. And to realize that it is behind me now is quite something. So first of all, I would say I didn't want to do the TED Talk consciously. This evolution of the center, it became really clear that I was being asked to speak about the work, and I have not historically been interested in speaking. So I reached out to a speaking coach in Asheville that I had seen a flyer for. She was doing a programming for SCORE, a business association that offers free, support to businesses. And her name was Barry Barton. And so I reached out to her because I had seen her flyer. And I called her and I said, hey, I am interested in basic 101 public speaking coaching. That was it, just not TEDx. And she said, as we were talking and she heard about my work, and she said, I just want you to know, I am the director of TEDx Asheville, and the theme this year is meeting the moment. And I just think your topic would be wonderful. And I said, whoa, time out. I'm not ready yet. And so fast forward. It was another example of where I trusted my intuition, and when applications opened, Barry let me know. And I just had the strong impulse to apply, not attached to the process. And sure enough, I made it through, like you said, the 3 rounds of applications. And it was quite something to embark on this journey. And I described it as sort of climbing Mount Everest. That's what it felt like I was doing something that was going to be incredibly worthwhile and incredibly challenging on many levels. And indeed, that's what it was for me. The TEDx Asheville community led by Barry Barton is so supportive and so community-centered in its approach, as you know. And so I felt very held in the process of essentially dying to a part of myself that has always kept myself small. They were sort of doulaing me and shepherding me through this process of speaking on that stage. So I'm really grateful for that. The process of the TEDx platform is such a unique platform. You have to find your message and distill it into 18 minutes. And so that process took the most amount of time. And it was a wonderful process because it helped me really get clear about what it is that I want to share with the world. And then the delivery phase of the journey was so challenging and so powerful. And you were part of that. I very distinctly remember the time I spent with you and how transformative it was to have exercises and tools to help work with the fear and work with the anxiety and work with the doubt, and to move through it and to emerge to where I could actually stand on that stage and offer something that may be of service, is my hope. Thank you for the question.
So when you and I interacted during your rehearsal process, you said, I helped you quite a bit. I didn't feel like I did all that much except listen to you. So what was it that moved you further down the line in terms of our interaction? And I'm asking that because it seemed very simple on my end, and yet it seemed to work very well on your end. And I would like to frame this around the simplicity of support that we can give each other.
There was something in that moment where I was practicing the delivery of my talk, and I was giddy and laughing. And this was after a series of exercises of speaking really loud and being teacher-like and playing with the voice and playing with language and playing with the bigness and the smallness. It's pretty typical for people in theater and doing spoken word. But for me, it was very unfamiliar. So I was sort of giddy in my delivery and excited, but nervous because it was unfamiliar. Like, what does it feel like to be big and to talk louder? And, I'd never done that before. And you came in at a time where I was you probably were sensing some nervous energy, and it was excitement mixed with nervousness and unfamiliarity. And you spoke to that. You asked me about the nervousness, or like, tell me what is this energy that I'm feeling? And you explored it and so lovingly, and didn't just brush over it or judge it. You were really present to me. In my response, what I said was, I feel so uncomfortable, or it's unfamiliar for me to be seen. Like, I'm comfortable talking one-on-one, but if you get me in front of 500 people, I'm anxious and I don't feel comfortable being seen. And so what you did was take that and actually acknowledge that, yes, you will be seen. And you came up into my field, very close to my face. It wasn't an invasion of anything. It was a really beautiful space that you held for me. I was looking directly into your eyes, and you were right with me. And you said, okay, so I'm seeing you. And you looked up and down my physical body, which would never have been comfortable before, but it was just like this acknowledgement that we are sharing space, that we are in this together, that yes, this is going to be happening in a week. There was something about how you moved with me in that space, and then you prompted me to continue my speech without trying to memorize the lines and just speak from your heart. And the way you were with me and encouraged me and embraced and held on to the words with curiosity and excitement and love, it just helped me move through that deep fear and anxiety. So it was profound for me.
Well, thank you for expressing that. I've not heard anybody really talk about it like that before. I've done that often with people, and I try to find where they're coming from. And one of the things I like to think about when I talk to people regarding being on a stage and being big, what we're really doing when we step in front of an audience, we're inviting everyone in the auditorium to be big. We are big, and so are they. We are all big. Let us just be big tonight. And in our largesse, we make room for more largesse. So it's an invitation for everybody to do that, not just the person on stage. And when you go on stage, and you did this at the TEDx talk, I watched it, I was there. When you go on stage and you invite the people to be big, that invitation allows them to see themselves as you on the stage. So they move up there on the stage and become you, even though you remain you. And then when you are finished, they feel like they did what you did. And it's a loop that happens. And then in the end, they give you credit for it. Oh my God, she was so great. And yet what they're really doing is acknowledging how large they felt because you were allowing them to be as large as you were. In some ways, Taylor Swift does that with 60 to 100,000 people. Somehow she has artistically figured out, maybe after long, hard work over many, many years, she has figured out how to make everybody in that audience feel like they're grand. And they respond to it because guess what? They are. So afterwards, when you did your talk, what went through your mind? How did you feel? How it influenced you? What it did for you? How you are using it now? How you felt?
I felt totally empowered and transformed. And I'm still feeling the ripples of that experience. And I think I will continue till my last breath. Shortly after I finished TEDx, I went to Singapore. I was invited to do some workshops and lectures, which I had never done before in that way. And it was profound. And I felt the confidence that has come from the TEDx journey. I have felt the support. What exactly you just said, we're not separate. Even though I am speaking, I often thought that if I were to speak and claim that spot on the stage, that there's this level of authority and this creation of separation. But the reality is there is no separation. I happen to be the messenger of this part of our humanity, our shared humanity. There's no shame and there's no arrogance in that. This is just my life's work. It's guided me to that moment of TEDx. It's guiding me beyond TEDx. And that's how it feels.
So when you were in Singapore giving your talk, did you have a large audience?
It was a talk for a hospice program. And it was about 120 participants, and the workshop was about 80 or 60. So yes, it was big for me, having shied away from those kinds of experiences, really.
And so what were a couple of things that you were able to employ in Singapore that you learned from TEDx Asheville work?
In terms of delivery and presence in front of people, it was completely different from how I would have showed up before TEDx. So there was this projection of my voice. There was a pace and rhythm and cadence to my speaking that was noticeable for me. And then there was just this comfort with the discomfort that allowed me to be more present because I wasn't so in my head. There was a trust and a surrender.
So now, how do you feel about being what you call large on stage? Have you gotten more used to that? How does that inform you now?
To be determined, and this is a little personal, but for me, there was a lifetime of discomfort in this physical body, self-consciousness, insecurity. And so to have really moved through all of those fears, I feel like I could do anything now. in the world. So I feel really big and I feel really comfortable in this human form for the first time. I know it sounds crazy, but it is transforming everything moving forward. Even when I have a presentation coming up, I'm not as worried or anxious or self-conscious, or, I just have let go of a lot. And that was part of the process of being able to show up on that stage, is having to work through all of those things, or let go, or just express gratitude for their service in my life and say goodbye to those parts of myself, really.
Your rehearsal process was quite long. You started in December and carried all the way through until March. And Barry Barton is a terrific speech and presentation coach. She understands the organizational part of this really well and understands the nuances of directing. She's an excellent director. And she gave you the rehearsal container to work in. So what I've learned listening to you describe your experience, I've learned that you can come very shy to the door for the first rehearsal. And if you stay in the soup for 3 months working, you will emerge a very different person with great strength. And it's all about being supported by the rehearsal process and the commitment to tell your story in a way that's meaningful and large for the audience so that they feel professionally complimented.
Yes. And I would say, when I've spoken to other people who've done TEDx in their local communities, not all of them have felt so held. And I think we are very blessed to have this TEDx community here, led by Barry. So I wanted to speak to that.
Many TEDx speakers get the assignment. Yes, you've chosen to speak. We'll see you at the talk. Work it up. You have 18 minutes. Go on, do your thing, get off. And Barry does not do that. And we know that what she does makes for a terrific show. And it's so well organized, so well timed. Everything that I saw during that day at TEDx Asheville was choreographed to the second, or at least it seemed like it. I guess if you talk to Barry, she would say, oh my gosh, there were so many flubs. I didn't know what to do. Didn't look like that from the outside. Finally, you're a musician as well. So I just wanted to acknowledge that as part of your TED talk. You played some music on stage and you sang. So you're a physician, you're a TED talker, and a singer as well.
Yes, very big part of my life from childhood. It was so wonderful to be able to bring that element in, because it grounded me. To be honest, it grounds me to play that music, and then to speak from there. That place was really powerful. And there was a moment of stepping outside from behind the instrument that I have not hid behind since I was 4, but tucked in behind. And that moment of stepping out away from the instrument and being fully embodied and present was really profound.
And you did a great job of stepping out. You stepped out into it. You didn't step out in a small way. You just allowed your wings to spread and stepped out and gave your talk. And then you returned to the instrument and closed us out with some music, bowed, thank you, and walked off the stage. Couldn't have been better.
That means so much, Navé.
And I would like to thank you for taking your time out of your day, your busy day. I know you have something coming up in 5 minutes. So, Aditi, it's really good to have you on Twice 5 Miles Radio. We will speak when I come back to Asheville and connect a bit more. And I look forward to learning all about the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. And what was the website again for that?
www.ccld.community.
Okay. So thanks for being on Twice 5 Miles Radio. I appreciate it.
Thank you so much, Navé.
And there you go, my friends, my conversation with Aditi Sethi. I hope you have a better sense of what she's doing at the Center for Conscious Living and Dying in Swannanoa. I'm looking forward to going out there when I return to Asheville in May 2024. I'd like to spend the rest of the time reflecting on the work I did with Aditi around her TEDx Asheville talk. And the reason why is because in a previous interview I did recently with Walter Parks, he talked about how all sound is created by way of distortion, distorting your voice when you speak high, you speak low. Making music, it's distorted through amplification. Even the most unplugged folk singer, when in the studio, has all of the same electronic gear that the most plugged in rock and roll player has on a big stage. Actually, probably the rock and roll player on the big stage has more plugged in gear. But the point is, even the folk singer strumming with the thumb on the guitar or playing the cello or the violin or whatever instrument happens to be played, it's going through all of the systems. The only time you don't have an electronic distortion is when you see somebody busking on the street. And Asheville, North Carolina is a great place to see buskers on the street. So if you want to hear non-electronic music played with only the distortion of the voice, then you can listen to a busker. But even the buskers will amplify. So the distortion on the street happens because the buskers are amplifying, or for that matter, the ambient sound around the people who are singing in the non-distorted electronic way also distorts the music. All of this is to say that when you're giving a talk, when you think of your voice as a way of distorting sound, which rises from your interior, and then you distort the sound by way of making syllables. I'm distorting the sound right now because I'm speaking in words that you understand, and I'm having to form those words as they come out of my mouth. Now, here's a little note that you may not know if you haven't given very many speeches or you haven't been on a spoken word stage or if you have never studied acting. I learned this from a woman named Mary Satrakian. Mary lives in New York, and Mary has a remarkable way of teaching. And this was a long, long time ago. Mary came to Taos to teach singing at our Artist Way Creativity Camp. In 1999, we were at what was at that time called the San Geronimo Lodge, and Julia Cameron and I were running these camps. So Julia knew Mary, and she invited her to come. And Mary gave singing lessons throughout the week. I've never been able to sing. My voice is pretty good as a spoken word radio voice, but singing, I'm always off key. So Mary said, if you want to make sure you have great voice projection, all you have to do is practice vibrating your head when you speak. When she first said that, I didn't know what she meant. Then she pointed out, when you vibrate your head, you're activating all of the channels in your head. So you have basically holes in your head. And Mary said holes in the head and everybody laughed, but she did make her point. So one of the things to remember when you're speaking in public, you can distort your sound, just like Walter Parks amplifiers, which he talked about in the previous show. You can distort your sound by letting your voice rise from your lungs. And when it comes to your head, if your head is vibrating and you can touch your head and feel it vibrating or not, depending on how you are letting your voice rise up through your lungs, through your throat, and then into your head. So right now, I'm vibrating my head. My voice doesn't have to project very far. All it has to do is go into the microphone that I'm speaking in right now, which is an inch or two from my mouth. So if you practice putting your hands on your head and you just let your voice rise up and then vibrate your head as you're speaking, when you find yourself at a table during a cafe conversation or a dinner conversation, and you want people to hear you, if you're vibrating your head, you can still speak in a normal, non-projecting voice, and it will cast all the way across the table, no problem. And if you end up on a stage and you have to give a TEDx talk or any other talk for that matter, I mean, many people have to give a talk at a wedding or a funeral or a birthday or a retirement party or a welcoming home party. If you have to do any of those, and many of us are called on to do that, then you can do it with the confidence that people will hear you. And what I mean when I say people hearing you, no strain. It's easy for them to lean into what you're saying. They can hear you and they don't have to work at it. So you are inviting people to relax, to hear whatever it is you have to say. So that's one point. And the other point around distortion, which also implies disruption, I'd like to talk about is when I came to the rehearsal with Aditi, she was giving her talk. She had practiced. She was clearly comfortable. No problem. It was great, actually. And she worked on it. And as you could tell in the interview we just had in our conversation, she's a very thoughtful person and is able to articulate what she has to say with great ease, clarity, and a bit of joy as well. She does enjoy her existence on this earth, or that's my impression of her. And yet, when I walked in the room, she was trying very, very hard to make her points. She knew what she had to say and she wanted to make those points. And her focus for her talk was, I want to get this across. I want people to hear me. I want to make my point because it is very, very important. What she was forgetting or trying to find was a way to shift that intention away from, I want to make my points and have it all be very, very important, to, I want to connect with the story that I'm telling in an emotional way that will allow me to present what I want to the audience in a way that they will connect emotionally to what I'm saying as well. Now, the way I was able to help Aditi do that, I stood up and got in front of her. And as she said in the interview, I didn't invade her personal space, but I did step into her performance space. And this is important because her performance space was contained within about 5 feet rather than expressed out over the whole area of the auditorium. So when I moved into her performance space, she didn't quite know what to do. So the first thing I said to her, allow me as your audience, think of me not as one person, think of me as your audience, 100 people, 200 people, and just allow me to look at you. Just relax and let me look at you. And think of me as a thousand eyes just looking at you, and relax into that allowance. And when she relaxed, I then said, this is an invitation to the audience that they can relax and they can look at you with the confidence that you will allow them more insight, more intimacy. I said intimacy, into me, see, allow the audience to see into you. And then the next thing I did was to tell her, just forget about all your memorization and just tell me what you want to say. And as she was telling me, I'm standing in her performance space. And what I'm doing as I'm looking at her and she's looking at me, she's allowing me to see her, and I'm allowing her to see me as well. The audience allows the speaker to see them as much as the speaker allows the audience to do the same. So in allowing her to see me within her performance space, I nodded. I said, yes, tell me more. Yes, I agree. Oh my goodness, I'd not thought of that. So I was whispering those kind of prompts as she was talking. So what she was experiencing from me was complete agreement, was complete curiosity, was complete engagement in what she was saying. And I was giving her, by physically responding, permission to say more. I was listening to her. And when you are in an audience, you're there to listen. And the best part of that exchange was Aditi was listening to me. I was in agreement. And the more I agreed, the more I wanted to know, the more curious I became. She had the same experience. So she forgot about her original intention of, I want to project all of this and make everybody feel good. She forgot about that. And what she was able to accomplish was a relaxation. And in that relaxation, we relaxed together. In that sense of ease, she connected more emotionally to her story. She connected to what she wanted to say, all the people she was helping at the Center for Conscious Living and Dying. She connected to her story, her music, her voice. She stayed soft. She stayed easy, but she dropped her stress. But once she experienced it, her body experienced it as well. And she was able to start to give herself permission to relax and engage and be curious and let that curiosity, the relaxation and the engagement grow and grow and grow. So finally, when she got to her TEDx Asheville talk, which was on the stage at the Diane Wortham Theater, she started with music. She's been playing music all her life, beautiful music. And it was a nice instrument that I was unfamiliar with, but I'd heard that kind of music before. Just beautiful. It wafted over the room, Everybody relaxed. And then when Aditi walked out from behind her instrument and gave her talk, she was much more at ease, much more relaxed, much more excited about telling the audience her emotional experience around the things she had been doing all her life. And it was a beautiful talk. That's the interior of how one can work with another to bring things out. So you vibrate your head, and if you're working with somebody to help them present their speech, just allow them to be themselves and give them as much confirmation as you can when you're standing in front of them. And if you do that and you practice that over a period of time, Aditi did practice for 3 months. So if you practice a lot and you have that sense of permission and you know that you are curious about what you're doing and you know that the people that are helping you practice are curious as well, you will find a great deal of success in giving your talk, no matter whether it's at a birthday party or a TEDx Asheville talk. So that's how I worked with Aditi. And I thought you might be interested in knowing that process. And I do enjoy doing it because it's so great. People tell stories. And when you tell a story and you try to get your truth across, everybody loves it. And I certainly love hearing people say what they want to say in a relaxed manner like Aditi did. And in closing, the most important thing to remember when you are creating something to present in public, the most important thing to remember, rehearsal, 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 over and over and over again. Engage it as much as possible. And the second thing to remember when you're rehearsing, keep in mind the stumbles, the mess, the forgetfulness, the doubt, all of that plays into the process. So when you're experiencing something that seems less certain when you're rehearsing, just know that that's part of the entry into what will eventually smooth out and be ease on the stage. So rather than thinking of your inadequacy when you don't quite get it, or if you have to memorize something and you drop a line or two, rather than saying, oh, I'm failing, I can't get this, just know that that's the entry point into the deeper work that's happening behind the scenes in your body and your psychology. And you're just allowing that deeper work to happen by stumbling and making the mistakes. Eventually, it will smooth out. You can think of your talk or your speech like a field that you're going to plant. You start out by plowing the field. You disrupt it. You distort the field's status quo. And then once the field is plowed, then you work the grass, you work the dirt, you work it all until it's smooth, and then you plant the seeds. And slowly you work the seeds, you work the garden, you work the field until harvest comes. And when harvest arrives, you harvest the crop and you have something that's worthwhile, nutritious. Same thing with a speech. You start with disruption, you start with distortion, you start with all of your ideas thrown against the wall, and you're not sure how it's going to play out, just like the field. You're not exactly sure what the harvest will look like. When you work through the 3-month period, as Aditi did, you have harvest. So 3 months is how long it takes for a garden to grow. It's also how long it takes for a speech to emerge, or anything else that you do creatively for that matter. Keep in mind, and I've said this before, and I'll say it again and again and again, mess is currency. Mess is where the value is. The disruption, the distortion, all of that is the currency that you can use to create something smooth that's always moving toward a sense of excellence. Never perfection, just excellence. Because perfection's something that you don't really need to worry about. You'll never be able to achieve it, so why bother with it? Rather, make the mess, disrupt, distort, and have something emerge that has great value to the people that you're presenting your work to. You present yourself and they receive you. It's like the wool nest in the middle between you and your audience. You all gather there and you tell your stories. And on that note, it's time to say thank you ever so much for listening to Twice 5 Miles Radio, fertile ground for conversations worth listening to. And remembering, I'm your host, James Navé, always airing first on WPVM-LP, Asheville 103.7, and streaming online, WPVMFM.org. the voice of Asheville, heard all over the world and on other community radio stations like KCEI, Cultural Energy Radio, coming out of Taos, New Mexico. Thank you, Walter Parks, for our theme song. WalterParks.com for more on Walter's music. Devine Dial, thank you for managing WPVM-FM in Asheville on Wall Street, downtown Asheville, in the Public Service Building. And Robin Collier, thank you for managing KCEI and from downtown in Taos, New Mexico. I appreciate that as well. And I'd like to remind you that we are sponsored by the Imaginative Storm Writing Project. If you would like to get a little messy, create some writing that's done by way of holding a pen and writing on the paper, fingers not on the keyboard, fingers holding the pen. Think of the pen as the magic wand generating work on the paper. Imaginativestorm.com is a good place to go for that kind of resource and that kind of work. So if you'd like to reach out to me, Navé at jamesnavé.com. Navé is spelled Nave, and my website, of course, is jamesnavé.com as well. So I would love to hear from you. What's going on in your kingdom, in your field, on your side of the fence? So once again, thank you for tuning in to Twice 5 Miles Radio, and I hope you do come back sometime soon. And until then, I'll catch you on that turnaround somewhere down the line.